And so I thought we need to start talking about and telling a different, more real story of grief. And that's what led to me, don't do this at home, kids, quitting my job without much of a plan and creating Reimagine Grief, which started with a line of empathy cards because I wanted us to talk about how do we show up for people, but also began with my podcast, Grief is a Sneaky Bitch, because I wanted to have real, authentic, messy, meaningful conversations about the pervasiveness and the expansiveness of grief in our lives. And I haven't looked back. It really feels like my life's calling.
Lisa Keefauver, welcome, welcome, welcome to Fear Unzipped.
It's such a pleasure to be here, Sandi. Thank you so much.
I'm really looking forward to it because we're talking about a very heavy topic, but you have such a great sense of humor and a lightness about you that you are the person I want to talk about grief to. Because we're going to keep it upbeat, but embrace it. So I want to tell people a little bit about you.
Of course.
They're going to figure out this really fast when you start talking. But you're a social worker, you're a widow, you're a cancer survivor, TEDx and keynote speaker, you're a grief guide, and a podcast host and author of Grief is a Sneaky Bitch. Hell yes, sister. Right here.
Thank you.
This is a book. Is a must for everybody because we all experience grief in some way or another, always. Yeah. And your podcast, which is very popular, is also of the same title. But what I really love that you're doing is you are reimagining grief for us, and it's time. So, and you're doing that one conversation at a time. And here's our conversation on Fear Unzipped. So, Lisa, when I start these, I always like to find out people's backstory. Yeah. And how you got to where you are. Would you mind sharing that story with us?
Yeah. Thank you, first of all, so much for having me. And yes, we can be having conversations about grief with light and joy, because grief and joy can coexist and do coexist. I love this question. And I don't know about you, but I think it's always interesting, especially the older I get, like, how do you draw the through line and which moments? And in my training in narrative therapy, I especially get like almost sometimes in my head, like, how do I, the key moments that are the through line to now? I certainly, when I was young, did not grow up and think I want to be a grief activist. That was not on my plate of imaginary, careers that I might have. But I will say that early in my teens, I experienced a really horrific traumatic event, and the care provider that I was seeing really missed the mark on holding space and bearing witness. They did not understand trauma. And I remember thinking even back then, there's got to be a better way to be a helping professional. I went on my way to do some work and research first, and then really found my calling as a social worker. So I went back to school in my late 20s, soon after I met and fell in love with Eric Keefauver, who was the most incredible man in the world and beyond my dreams of a partner. I had not had a good experience with partners before that. And ended up working in lots of spaces, foster care, adoption, crisis intervention, family services. And what I didn't realize until my husband passed was that I'm working, of course, then with grief. But I look back and think it's so absurd. In my master's in social work training, we did not have one single course on grief. Yeah. Right. So I was a clinical director. I was a therapist. I was a student supervisor, running helping to run a medium-sized, I guess I would say, nonprofit, when the love of my life became unrecognizable. We went from doctor to doctor, trying to find out how this sweet, kind, caring, carry a spider out the door, kind of guy who was a geographer who knew his way around the world was repeating conversations, getting lost, going to our best friend's house, becoming quite rageful, to be honest, and quite scary. And doctor after doctor said, oh, it's just a mental health thing, go on some meds. Oh, it's getting worse, go off some meds. To the point where, I want to be honest, I was making safety plans for myself and my then 7-year-old daughter. Like, how are we going to nap? Like, who is this? We know it's not him. And then I found myself at the age of 40 lying on that bed with my husband, as he died only 2.5 weeks after they finally ran a scan to find out it was a grapefruit size brain tumor. And I just get, even all these years later, I just get overwhelmed by that. And when my work called me back to work 2 weeks later, right, which is insane now when I look back, it was then that I really realized, even in the helping professions, even in the with the people that we think should know something, we have really gotten grief wrong in our culture, in modernity anyways, in this current time in our culture. And I went on to do some other work. I've helped found a nonprofit that helps cancer patients, et cetera. But it was after a different health scare, not the one I just recently survived, which was cancer, that I thought I can't have had all of this professional experience with grief. All these grieving people, refugees, people who've survived devastating traumas, the death of loved ones, chronic illnesses and injuries, the death of dreams, all these experiences. And have all this experience at that point because I had found a nonprofit. I was on TV and radio. I was a public speaker. I was, sort of a evangelist for the nonprofit that I was running. And then all my personal experiences with loss, and not do something with it. I should say, I just want to say one more thing before that, is that just a few years after my husband died, our family friend Joe, who's very close to my brother and I, finally succumbed to the muscular dystrophy that he had been fighting most of his life. And I was by his bedside when he died too, and went back to work the same day.
Oh.
Because that's the nature of our culture right now. And so all of that led me to say, I need to reimagine grief. My studies were in narrative therapy, so the language we use to talk about things is words create worlds, as a poet who I can never remember the originator of that, I don't want to claim credit for that, said. And so I thought we need to start talking about and telling a different, more real story of grief. And that's what led to me, don't do this at home, kids, quitting my job without much of a plan and creating Reimagine Grief, which started with a line of empathy cards because I wanted us to talk about how do we show up for people, but also began with my podcast, Grief as a Sneaky Bitch, because I wanted to have real, authentic, messy, meaningful conversations about the pervasiveness and the expansiveness of grief in our lives. And I haven't looked back. It really feels like my life's calling.
It's absolutely your life's calling. So
Yeah.
Eric actually is a part of all of this.
Yes.
And so I'm sure so proud of you, what you're doing. And it's really remarkable. When you came up with Grief is a Sneaky Bitch.
Yeah.
Is it accurate that was at a party, that you were at a party? Can you share that story? Because it's
a good one. Yeah, I love the title. It's so cheeky. I've had surprising people who I would have thought would not care for my judicious use of cussing say how much they love it because it's true. So maybe a year after-ish, I was at a party with a new friend who's now my soul sister best friend, but who didn't know Eric. I had met sort of briefly. In fact, we were introduced at a different party where someone said to her, "Oh, that's Lisa. Her husband just died." That's how they introduced me. So classy. Anyways, so we were at a party with her, really fun, great music. I remember thinking like, wow, this feels good to not just be in the depth of my pain and my grief. And, but mostly people I didn't know really, and this was a relatively new friend at the time. And I reached into my purse, and for some reason there was a printed out picture of Eric, which I don't remember how it got in there. I didn't necessarily carry around pictures. And I reached in, there's a picture of Eric and I burst into like heaving, sobbing, ugly, no controlled crying. And my friend kind of noticed and came over, and we went to the side, and I just, showed her the picture, and we sort of, cried. And I just said, grief is such a sneaky bitch. And she, having experienced the stillbirth of her son, Zion, understood intimately how true that is. And it just hung around in my head. That was many years before I created the podcast and, of course, before I wrote the book. But it became a kind of expression between the two of us. And I want to name the reason that I chose it, because much to the chagrin of many people, like, oh, are you going to get blocked on social media? And I can't pay to advertise my podcast because of the swear word in it. All the reasons is there's a real double entendre to grief as a sneaky bitch, which I'm not sure if everybody quite recognize. On the one hand, grief is a sneaky bitch because grief is messy and nonlinear, and it is, reminded and reactivated when we experience new losses or we cross paths with certain people, right? So there's the natural way in which grief is a sneaky bitch. It is inevitably sneaky. But also, grief is a sneaky bitch because we have a misguided, limited, narrow, and frankly wrong story of grief in our culture. So the expectations that we have of ourselves and others in grief are so vastly different from our lived experience of grief that we get unnecessarily caught off guard. And then we suffer unnecessarily because we do this thing we should all over ourselves. I didn't swear that time. I did say should, right? We should all over ourselves. So grief is a sneaky bitch inherently, but there's also a way in which it's not appropriately or because of culture sneaky. And that's really what I'm trying to tackle, is to sort of bring down that gap between our expectations and our real lived experiences so we can show up with compassion. Yeah.
You're doing that really well, Lisa, because we don't know what to do.
Yeah.
We don't know what to say. We don't know. I was at a party also with a friend who had lost her husband about 8 months before.
Yeah.
Having a wonderful time. And all of a sudden she just burst into tears.
Yeah.
It's that same thing. Grief is a sneaky bitch. And but it is true. And so it takes a hold of us at times that we're thinking everything's fine, that we're over. Oh, this is good. We're over it.
Yeah.
We
And I think that's that mistake. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. So I did want to say this. This is a quote from your book that I think applies to fear. And it's grief isn't something to get over. It's something we learn to live with and ground around. And I feel that it's not a problem to solve.
Exactly.
It's a teacher. It's a teacher to sit with.
Yeah.
And then you grow, you blossom, you grow exponentially from it. And and of course, if you grieve deeply, you've loved deeply.
Yes.
And how lucky are you to experience that? Anyway, oh my God, I'm getting kind of emotional right now, just even talking about this because it is an emotional topic.
It is.
There were so many helpful hints in this book for me, and I grabbed onto AFGOs.
Yes.
I grabbed onto that, and I was listening to it on Audible. I shoot baskets every morning at the gym.
Yeah.
And I went, oh my God, yes. How many of these am I going to have in my life? And I'm going to have endless ones. Can you explain what an AFGO is?
Yeah. Thank you so much. I love that you picked up on that in particular. Yes. In addition to being tattooed on my body. So AFGO is an expression. I got to give my shout out to my mom, who isn't quite much of a swearer. But anyway, she taught this to me when I was young, soon after I experienced that trauma when I was a teen. I experienced rape when I was 15 through a devastating assault, and was, working on healing, and then stumbled on some much smaller I can't even remember what some teenage, angst. Well, I think it was their getting divorced and my parents getting divorced. And I just sort of said to her, I want to figure out how to, what do I do with this? And she said, Lisa, this is just another fucking growth opportunity.
That's mother.
That's from my mom, although I don't think she created it. I'm sure she heard it somewhere. I don't want it didn't come from our family in particular. But I'm saying that's how far back in my life. And really an AFGO, I'm always careful when I talk about AFGO. And actually my Substack is called AFGO with Lisa Keefauver, if folks want to join me there. But I really think about it as a way to not to bypass our suffering, our hurt, our grief, our harm. In fact, quite the opposite. We have to be with it. We have to sit with it. We have to feel with it, right? Or the scary thing that's going to happen or has happened, right? The fear that comes up, the anger, the rage. And at some point, we get to choose what, to your point, what you were saying earlier, what do I want to learn from this? What can I learn from this? Maybe it's just the affirmation that love is so important to me and I got to love and I want to center love in my life. Or maybe it's, depending on what happened to you, I need to be more, I want to be more discerning around the people I surround myself with, or, you know, regardless of sort of what the tumult is, what the tragedy is, what the harm is, the hurt is, we have an opportunity to reframe and to ask ourselves, what is the growth opportunity here? The cheeky part of it is like also another fucking growth opportunity. I mean, now my friends and I, we all say to each other, like when something goes wrong, like, I didn't need another, like I've learned already, I've grown already. Right? So I think it's this opportunity to reframe. The thing I want to say that I have to say every time I talk about AFGO is, because in my work as a social worker, as a narrative therapist, and just the way I see the world, we can never understand ourselves outside of the cultural context in which we inhabit. And so we do live in a very toxic positivity, post-traumatic growth, over glorification of, you're so strong and how amazing, and let's just celebrate the end. We don't want to talk about the journey, the journey. We want to talk about the destination. We don't want to talk about the harm. We want to talk the overcoming, because we have this myth that we've pulled ourselves up by our bootstraps. And so I just caution with, when we use AFGO for ourselves, because it's more for us to use for ourselves, don't go AFGO on other people. That's not your job, right? It's our job to AFGO ourselves, to ask ourselves that question. It's not an invitation to bypass the suffering. It's actually just, to me, AFGO helps me bear the weight of the ambiguity, of the heaviness, of the harm, of the fear, of the anger, while I'm metabolizing it. Because that AFGO is kind of like this goalpost, or this like prompt that I can keep coming back to when I feel the weight of it. So yeah, we AFGO ourselves. We don't AFGO on other people. And we also don't use it as a bypass to our suffering, but it's going to be the death of people we loved. It's going to be when we find out we're infertile. It's going to be, when we've had a friendship end or a relationship end, we leave our home country. I think about all of the refugees and the immigrants and all of the struggles that they're experiencing and continue to. So we AFGO ourselves. And I think it's been such a gift to me, which is why I shared it in the book and why I actually started my Substack, kind of talking about those stories and how we think about AFGO. Yeah.
So for me, AFGO takes something that is just, could be like something that hits me in the face, like, oh, here I go again. Yeah. Okay, I thought I was over it. But it adds a sense of humor to it.
Yes.
Which for me, Lisa, shifts my physicality.
Yes.
And I say, oh, another AFGO. And I go, okay, let's dive right in. Let's dive right in and let's see, what am I learning here? Yeah. And that's what I like about it. It's not being flippant. I don't think it's being flippant.
No.
Look at the acronym for my podcast, Fear Unzipped, is FU. I did not even know that until after I started doing some graphics and people were going FU. And I went, oh, no, we can't do that.
Or we can. Yeah.
Or we can. Because it's not about FUing anything. It's about diving in, exploring, appreciating, learning, having curiosity, all of those things. And we're human. We are going to experience loss, and we're going to experience every emotion that you possibly can, which is the beauty about being human, really.
Yeah. I mean, it's our aliveness. I think our culture has tried to make us believe that there's some straightforward linear path and that any bumps is somehow odd or unhuman or our problem. But I think that's the problem, which is why I'm always railing about culture. It's like, no, AFGO helps us be like, oh yeah, this is life. This is being alive. I get to have great joys, but that also means I get to have great sorrows. And so what do I do with the sorrows or the fear or anything?
It's that toxic positivity that I also wrote down as a note. That we think, oh, I can't be sad. I mean, I have to be, it's been 6 months since this loss, no matter what the loss is. Oh, this is on 6 months. Aren't I supposed to be, involved in community again? No, we do it, I think, at our own speed. And there I have found with myself, I mean, I've had lots of losses,
Yeah.
like people who have passed. I've had losses in friendships. I've had losses in relationship, just all kinds of different things. And every once in a while, I get a little ping, like,
Yes.
where'd that come from? And then I can ease right through it, but I ease through them really, really quickly now.
Yeah.
But that's
Yeah.
because I did a deep dive into neuroscience and metaphysics. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and because you're showing up, I want to say that
yeah.
the irony is so many of us think if we can just tuck it away or pack it away, we can move along the trajectory of our lives and have less and less triggers. But what I found over and over and over and over and over again in my own life, but definitely in the hundreds, if not thousands of people I've served now over my career, is just the opposite. So our emotions want to be seen. I wrote a poem called like Stop By for a Cup of Coffee. Like our emotions, all of them just want to be seen. Or if you think about Rumi's house, like, and so that work to turn into it doesn't mean that we're not going to have these flares or these, sometimes we call them grief bursts or waves, if you think about it. But that's actually because we have now had all this new lived experience. We're having new encounters, new relationships, and that we are now trying to calculate how that fits into the broader story of our life. In the beginning, grief is our whole story. And over time, our goal is for grief to become a part of our story. Although in the beginning, it feels like our whole story, which is why we have these like bursts, because we're now trying to we're storytelling creatures. So we're trying to figure out, how does this new experience or relationship or person or event fit into the narrative of my life? We need a sort of cohesive narrative as humans. And that's where those sort of bumps or bubble ups or speed bumps, however you want to think it, arrive in our lives. So I try to look at them as a gift. Let me just say, even though I talk the talk and walk the walk, there are definitely days where I'm swearing at the bumps, and I'm swearing even at the AFGO. I'm FUing the AFGO. But I think these humor, the judicious use of cussing, the understanding the narrative helps so much carry the weight of what we're all going to carry in some form or fashion many times in our lives, to be honest.
We're human, Lisa. And I'll tell you, I do this podcast. I talk to the most brilliant people, such as yourself. I know so much. I know what to do if I get into a little bit of a pickle. And sometimes I'll go, not going to do it. I'm just going to feel it, and I'm going to be pissed or whatever it is. So, and my husband points that out to me.
I know. I mean, I think that is the challenge or opportunity of being a provider or being somebody with insight as yourself, and like all the folks that you've been interviewing, is we can again hold ourselves to an unrealistic standard. And that's, we just have to shorten that window between our expectations of ourselves and like, this is just where I am today.
And that's something I love about your book and about grief, because, and I did that with this podcast. I look at, we're human, we are going to slip. It just is what we do, but we pick ourselves back up. So I love that you give grace to whatever time it takes, whatever you need. If getting your feet on the floor out of bed is a huge thing, chalk it up as a huge win. It is a huge win. I really love the two words that you say are profane and you detest. Can we go into those words a little bit?
Yeah, I know. It's so funny. I mean, my publisher was happy that I didn't swear as much as I think they thought I was going to in my book. I just want to tell the listeners, it's not like I'm swearing every other word. I do use it judiciously, as one reviewer noted. But the sort of swear words or profane words that I think we have to be a detective around, we have to be discerning around, because they're so insidious, are the words should and shouldn't. And I have found, research is me search kind of, so I have found from my own experience, and of course, working with all kinds of populations over my 20+ year career, that so much of our suffering, so much of what we call our stuckness, if you ever heard somebody saying, like, I just feel stuck, or we allege that against other people, they just seem stuck. I have noticed a pattern that our stuckness often comes in relationship to the words should and shouldn't that are mostly rattling around in our own head, by the way. So it's not even first that we have to discover when we're saying it out loud to others about ourselves or to others about them. But it's that, I don't know about you, but I've got a very loud inner narrator. She's yapping in my head a lot. I'm trying to have I'm working on a better relationship with her. But that in grief, that shows up in so many ways. I shouldn't be sad. I should be happy. I should go back to work. I shouldn't talk to my kids, cry in front of my kids. I should not want to be in a relationship now. I should feel more sad. I shouldn't, right? It comes in so many ways. And that is all based, again, on this harmful cultural story we have about grief. And that's just not the truth. It's messy and nonlinear, and you can feel multiple emotions at once. And it affects, as we know from amazing humans like Mary Frances O'Connor, who's done research on both grief on the brain and grief on the body, that it impacts our cognitive, physical, emotional, relational, spiritual well-being. So how do we do that? Well, we become what I call a should detective. And I have an exercise in the book at the end of that chapter. S is a dirty word, right? That chapter is beginning to practice. What are the I even have some of the exercises. I don't know if I can pull it up in my book, but we want to get curious to notice, like, what am I talking most often about should and shouldn't? Is it around how I behave in front of my kids? Is it about my emotional landscape? Is it about my role in community or work, right? So what are the shoulds and shouldn'ts happening around? What are the common themes? And this is where we might practice writing in our journal for a week or a month or a few days even. We just notice, or throughout the day, we write it down. What are the circumstances? Is it coming up when I'm talking with other people? So maybe I'm sensing a kind of expectation or judgment on me. Is it coming up when I'm really overtired? Is it, by the way, answer to that is always yes, right? Is it coming up when I'm hangry? You know, I haven't been eating or haven't been moving my body. And is it coming up when I'm talking to people about it? While I believe talking to people about our grief is profoundly important, one of the cautions I talk about in the book is sometimes if we're not careful, if we're not curious about the language we're using around our grief, we're amplifying or doubling down on these should and shouldn't stories. So we also want to be curious. We might even have a good friend who can help be a detective with us. So when they say, how are you doing? And you say something and then you say, I shouldn't be crying at the party, but I just couldn't help it. Maybe your friend can notice, hey, did you notice you just said shouldn't? So it's an invitation to be curious. That's why I call it being a detective, because there's no right way to be. There just is how you're grieving. Again, you can use it as a tool. You can use it as information. Oh, I'm noticing a pattern. It's when I guess I've not been sleeping for the last 5 nights. Maybe I really need to work on my sleep regimen, you know? And we suffer, we get stuck because we should all over ourselves. And then we are sort of blocked, and we have not compassion for ourselves, but we feel a lot of judgment for ourselves. So we can be a should detective. We can invite the people we trust in our lives to help us too. And again, even when you notice it, by the way, I still, to this day,
Of course.
I should and shouldn't on myself. What I am is way quicker at recognizing when it happens. Sometimes I chuckle out loud. Sometimes I laugh. Sometimes I curse a little bit. And then I can get curious with compassion. Okay, well, what's an alternate story? What's a story that serves me? This is a question I ask people to ask themselves all the time. Get curious about the story you're telling in your head, especially when they include should and shouldn't. And then ask yourself, is this story serving me? Is it keeping me stuck? Is this even my story, by the way? Most of us are walking around with stories and narratives in our heads that are our parents, our grandparents, our partners, our culture. They're not even our stories. And the beauty about being the human, because there is a lot of beauty about being human, is then we get to make a choice to tell a different story.
Exactly. I say fear is a story. Let's rewrite it.
Yes.
You can write whatever you want. So my son, I was talking to my son, this was probably a year ago, And I said, oh, David, you should listen to. He goes, Mom, do you think you could not use the word should?
Oh,
At 36 years old, I just thought, hey, I said, oh my gosh, absolutely. Because I've said it that before.
yes.
It's part of my lexicon. I just say it.
Yeah.
I don't know what the value of the word should really is because it comes from a fictitious place.
Yeah.
Is that, it just
I
seems
think
like,
so. I mean, I think so because I think even when we think about our collective moral values, so I think, we think about should coming up with like, you shouldn't murder someone or you should be kind to your child or whatever. There's really there is some places in which I think there's this collective, maybe moral understanding or collective values, but the way it's snuck its way into our everyday lexicon, our everyday vocabulary, where we're so busy, other focused, controlling other people's behaviors instead of returning that to ourselves, that I think it's become problematic. The words should and shouldn't, which I count as one word, that word, and the word but, I think are two of our most problematic words in our lexicon, both for ourselves as grievers, for the people that we're trying to show up as grief supporters, but also just more broadly in the fractures and fissions that we see in our interpersonal relationships, our work relationships, and even at the sort of global scale. Yeah.
but sort of seems like a should. Like, well, and that is going to bring us to your tattoo.
Yeah.
Yes, and.
Yes, and yeah.
And can we talk about that a little bit rather than but maybe yes and?
Yeah, yes, and what Sandy's referring to is I have a tattoo on my arm that has a black band around my wrist that represents honoring the dead, but instead of closing, it opens into an ampersand and then goes into a large bouquet of flowers, some of which are filled in and some aren't. The filled in ones represent beauty and the life well lived, and the unfilled in flowers represent the life that was interrupted and also the life that I have yet to live. And it's the yes and. We can hold both grief and joy. We can be in sorrow and see beauty. And actually, that's our calling, I think, as humans. The reason I wrote a chapter around yes and I think I called it Improv Skills Help. And I'm now, I don't know, 4 months deep into improv classes myself, by the way, because I thought I'd follow my own advice. Is again lends itself to the problematic stories we have created. And when I say we, I'm talking about sort of in modernity, in capitalism, and sort of what we often refer to as Western culture, but which has, of course, spread across the globe. But so this isn't always the way humans have behaved around grief and loss. In fact, this is a blip in the screen of how around grief and loss, and also around understanding the complexity of things. We humans are storytellers. We hate ambiguity. Of course, speaking of fear, ambiguity, gets all of our fear hackles up, rightly so. Thank goodness for our nervous system that keeps us on alert. But that means we've now, especially in modernity, tried to tell a story that there is a way to control everything and that everything is binary. It's black and white. It's either or. And the problem is that's BS. That's just not actually how life is. So when we think about, and in every college, when I used to teach grief and loss at the University of Texas at Austin. So all of my college students know, my daughter knows, my friends know, all my clients know. Anytime somebody says, but, I'm like, and? I have people write me still to this day, like, I've started using and more. Why is that important? Well, when we say but, we're negating everything we said before. So when we say, I'm really struggling and I'm really suffering and I just really miss my person and I don't know how to get out of bed. And then we say, but. Well, we're kind of negating that whatever's going to come after the but means whatever came before it can't be true. The truth is both are true. So what if we said, and I'm taking these 3 steps to try to make my days a little more filled with ease? Because in early grief, our goal is not to feel better, but maybe to find more ease is how I often refer to it when I'm working with especially new grievers. So when we say but, we assume that there's a right way and a wrong way. Well, that's really problematic when it comes to grief and loss for sure, but also when it comes to parenting, when it comes to being an athlete, a human, whatever it is. So yes, and really comes from the improv skills. There's lots of improv skills, but yes, and means that's how you keep a conversation going. We both assume that there's a reality there. So somebody says, boy, it's raining. I guess I need an umbrella. If we say, but, or no, we contradict them. Well, then it ends, right? So if we say, yes, and I heard in the forecast that the sun is coming out, and then we can continue to move along. I mean, that's just a little idea from a improv skit, but it shows up in our lives too. You're going to start noticing now how many listeners, how many times you say, but.
I'm thinking about it right now, and I'm thinking this is the greatest tool ever.
Yes, and.
Yes, and oh my gosh, if nothing else, this is fantastic.
Yeah, I think it's really helpful. And I have to say, I catch it for myself. So that's the way we get ourselves stuck, because we negate any of our growth when we say, but, I was in bed for 2 days, even though I was doing well before. How about, and I was in bed for 2 days, but I'm noticing only after 2 days and I'm doing something better, right? A lot of times we but other people. And it's really important for us to yes and. Yeah. I mean, we do it as parents for sure. I do it. I have a 21-year-old recent college graduate, but we do it in all kinds of places. And it's a very closing off. It's not just that we get stuck in our grief and our healing and our growth, but when we are closing off the possibility of learning from one another, of growing, of continuing the conversation, the relationship. We're really kind of putting up a barrier.
It's like a stop sign. When I hear it, it's sort of like a stop sign, and words carry energy.
Absolutely.
So
yes.
That's where the difference between, if you just listen and feel the energy, what is the difference between saying but and what's the difference between saying and? You can energetically feel it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. You can feel it. The person on the receiving end can feel it. And it changes the dynamics energetically. And also, when we think about our cognitive and how we use language, it changes our cognitive, what we see as possible or not. Mm-hmm. When we say but, we close down a world of possibility. When we say and, or I wonder, gosh forbid we don't have an answer, I'm curious, then we open up the world of possibility. And so much of our suffering, when we've experienced something that leaves us really deep in fear, when we are brought down by the weight of grief or loss, so much already of our world has closed in. So we want to do everything we can, even when it comes to these are 3-letter words that have so much power to open up what's possible.
Yeah. With curiosity. And it's grace. It's giving yourself grace. I mean, geez, we need that. Can I ask you with Eric, after he passed, did you feel him? Did you see him? Were there signs that you received?
Yeah, this is so interesting. I spoke about this with our mutual guest and friend, Susan Graw, when she came on my show. But so what's happened for me, it'll be 14 years this summer since Eric died in my arms, which feels insane to say. I think if anybody's lost a partner there, they can understand that. I have felt him in waves and starts over these last 14 years. In the first year or two, I felt him more, but also he would show up in my dream. But I would have this recurring dream that was really, it's both and. Amazing to have him there, but also brutally crushing, because he would show up in the dream. This was a series of dreams. I had some version of it where we would see each other and we would run up to each other and would say, oh my gosh, it's all been a huge mistake. You're actually alive. This is so amazing. And then at some point in the dream, we would both realize he was dead. And then I would wake up and realize he was dead.
Like reliving it.
So I had that for a long time. But then there was a point a few years in where he just started showing up when I was hitting some really difficult crossroads, some difficult things. He showed up in my dreams, but also just songs would come on, just kind of experiences like that. And then really in the last probably second half of my life in the wake of his death, I would say, I've really brought a lot of intention to speak to him. I speak to him a lot. out loud pretty much every morning. I have a morning mantra that I do. I've done for, I don't know, 10 something years around finding love. And I don't mean romantic love, but seeing, may I see love, may I feel love, may I radiate love, may I receive love. It's a mantra that literally downloaded to me one day in a yoga class. But now I've also added speaking to Eric and inviting him to show up in our lives. And, I started to attach him to some symbols. I don't think I just say this cautiously, because if you're a griever and they're not visiting you, or they're not a butterfly, or they're not a thing, I think there's also even weirdly a lot of pressure that puts on people to like, oh, they're not visiting you. You must, and then people think, oh, I must not be doing something right, or they must not have loved me, or I must not love them. So I just want to say, if you're not experiencing any of those things, that's okay too. I have found the more I talk to him and invite him into my life, the more I feel his presence. Sometimes symbolically, like there's this 2 monarch butterflies that literally just practically land on me almost every day in my backyard. It's really amazing. And we had a thing about butterflies, but also just I feel him more in the decisions I make, in the delight I take, because I live now in Southern California and it's just ridiculously gorgeous here, 365 days a year. So that's all to say. He shows up in different ways. Do I wish he showed up in my dreams more in fun ways? Yeah, I sure do. But I call him into my life with a lot more intention now. It was too painful for me to do that early on. Early on, I cried at him. Like, I can't believe you left me and I'm parenting all alone and I miss you. But now it's a more tender invitation, or something happens quirky and I'll be like, did you see that, Eric? That's pretty cool. Or like when I published my book, or when I survived cancer, it was like, So yeah, I feel him pretty much every day. I feel him in this conversation.
Okay, I was going to say that he's here. My body is in chills.
Yeah.
He's here, Lisa.
Yeah.
And it's so beautiful. And I think what you said is really, really important, that if a loved one passes, their energy does not dissipate, because it can't. But if you can't feel it, or don't worry about it, they are there. And don't, get all worked up because, this person, when their loved one died, a feather fell in their hand,
Yes.
No, they are there. I know that with every ounce of my being. And Eric is so here. He's very delightful, I might add.
He's very delightful. He is very charming. I mean, he was a very handsome guy, but he also, thank you. I appreciate you saying that. And I do feel his energy. And he, like me, I would say one of the things that we shared is he was just deeply curious and delighted by things. Like, he was like amazed by things. And unlike me, he had an incredible memory before the brain tumor took over. And he could remember every little detail you ever said to him. But he really leaned into conversations. He smiled. He looked right into your eyes.
I can feel it. I can see him, and he has a twinkle. He has a little mischievous little twinkle thing going on. And so, Eric, we're so glad to have you here. This is wonderful.
Thanks, Eric. I love it.
It's fantastic. So I wanted to get into a little bit about dive buddies and
and how me and my metaphors.
No, okay. And so metaphor, you're like the metaphor queen. Metaphor is the greatest way for humans to understand a feeling that's ambiguous. That it's and we gravitate to metaphor. And so can you share what scuba diving did to you? And I love that.
Yeah, thank you. I know. I love metaphors. I don't know if I said it in the book, but somebody once said, you're the queen of metaphors. And I thought, well, that's about the biggest compliment I could have ever received in my entire life. I do. I think we crave metaphors to not just understand the ambiguity of the feelings that we're experiencing, but also just life is complex and, incomprehensible at times. And metaphor helps us just get a little closer to the truth of something, and also helps us feel less alone. Yeah. The metaphor can help bridge, you might not have experienced the death of a husband, or you might not have experienced the death of a child, but you can we can relate on this metaphor about how we feel in the wake of loss, right? So it's
like broken heart. Okay, we can relate to broken heart.
Which, by the way, also is physiologically a truth. But anyway,
yes, I know that.
I'll let Mary Frances O'Connor take the lead on that conversation. Yes. So scuba diving has been such a metaphor. I learned to do it when I was 12, which is a little crazy to me now. Was with my dad, who was a scuba diver, which is also a confusing story how he ever became a scuba diver. But with very little training, which again, don't recommend, I found myself on a 60-foot dive on my first day at 12 with my dad, or maybe it was 40, but anyways, in Hawaii. And, I gleaned this metaphor early on because you dive in and you have to breathe deep. So I have this metaphor, dive in, breathe deep, and buddy breathe when necessary, because one of the important skills that you learn in scuba diving is you never dive alone. And you learn how to share your oxygen and communicate when your air is running low. And then we have these things that we breathe through called regulators, but everybody diving has two, their primary and a backup. And we learn how to share our air with somebody else until we can get to safety, till we can ascend slowly to the surface after taking our safety stop. And so I learned really young, I sort of understood that metaphor of dive and breathe deep. Easy to do when it's something you want to do. You want to quit your job, or in college, I decided I wanted to live in Australia. So I made up my own study abroad program out of nowhere with fax machines and letters, and ended up moving to Sydney at 21. Like
my daughter did the exact same thing.
I love that. I love
Sydney.
that. Yes. Well, because Sydney is amazing.
Yeah.
Right. So we can dive in and breathe deep in these fun ways. Or when I quit my job and created this company, like that's, amazing. There still might be this fear. There's this unknown. I've definitely taken some crazy big risks in my life, right? Or what we think of as risk in my life. But what do you do when you're shoved into deep waters, right? And that's when you have to learn. And I learned it the first time really when I was assaulted when I was young, but I really understood it truly when my husband died at age 40, that we're not meant to do this alone, and that we do need help breathing. And so buddy breathing is that thing that you do when you're running out of air, hopefully running out of and not totally out of air, but anyways, and you go back and forth and the person shares their regulator and you breathe a little bit at a time. And what I learned when Eric died and my best friend came and literally peeled me out of his arms, out of the hospital bed, and drove me home, where I had to tell our 7-year-old daughter that her dad was dead, that I can't do this alone. And so I learned for the first time how critical really it was to both ask for help and then let people help you. Those are two different things. And as a clinical director, I was a social worker, I was a clinical director, again, that expert thing, like I should know how to do this. No, you don't.
You should.
Right? I should immediately all over myself. And that's the myth. The myth, again, in modernity and our modern culture and Western culture, we have this myth of individualism. We have this myth of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, that you can go from devastated to, standing on the podium in 5 seconds flat. And the scuba diving metaphor that I, again, much like AFGO, I tell myself often, and I've had a recent experience of remembering about buddy breathing again, is that reminder that no, we are not meant to do this alone. We used to grieve in community because we used to live in community. We didn't have to ask for help because our parents and grandparents lived with us and our neighbors were in our business and we were maybe part of mosques or temples or synagogues or churches, right? And so dive in, breathe deep, and buddy breathe when necessary. My scuba metaphor is also another just like tool or reminder to myself, of course, but to my listeners, my readers, my clients, whoever comes, your listeners now too, I hope, that we're not meant to do this alone. And that we are sometimes both the person supplying oxygen to somebody else, and sometimes we're the one receiving it. That whole put on your oxygen mask before helping others on the airplane. It's like we always think about ourselves as like, well, I got to put mine on and then help somebody else. But sometimes we're the somebody else. Right. And so that metaphor is a really important reminder. And the reason I say it so often, I wrote a whole chapter about it in the book, is it's so countercultural. And one of the ways we suffer unnecessarily in grief, one of the ways we quote unquote feel stuck, and I just have to always use air quotes because I feel we overuse that word when we talk about grievers. But even if you feel in some way you feel stuck, it's often because we're trying to grit and muscle alone our way through, the dark, the long dark, as Francis Weller calls it, right? And we're not meant to do it alone. We need community, we need ritual, we need movement. And that buddy breathing metaphor helps remind us, okay, it's time to find our help. Yeah.
It's a great metaphor. What do you, Lisa, suggest when we come up with somebody who's had a devastating loss?
Yeah.
If it's a death, it's a huge loss.
Yes.
What do you suggest that we say as the other person, the friend, the supporter, and not say?
Yeah. Yeah.
To help out.
Well, this is my biggest, I have a whole chapter on what people say to you. It's called When People Say Stupid Shit, because I had to use a little judicious use of swearing there. But I think when people ask me this question, which of course, people ask me often, like, what do I say to my person and what I don't say? I'm going to start with the long list of things you don't say, some of which were said to me in the hospital as I was taking my husband off life support, by the way, which is, don't worry, he's going to be in a better place soon.
Yeah.
And I'm 100% sure my 40-year-old husband's better place is here, right? We don't start any sentence with at least. At least you had 10 years. At least they had a long life. At least they didn't suffer or they're not suffering anymore. No, we don't do at least. We don't do but.
Yeah.
I will promise I will tell you that some of the things we say, but I think I want to first name it's our grief support work starts before we show up. So my mantra is show up, shut up, and listen, and keep showing up. That's my grief support mantra. But it starts with our energy, to your point, and all the work you've been doing and you're talking about today. When we show up with anxious energy, activated energy, it's going to spill onto the griever. And that is the last thing the griever needs. And you know this because when you've been having a perfectly fine day and somebody walks into the room and before they even say something, but they have that sort of anxious energy, you're like, ugh. So we know it's true, right? So we pause before we pick up the phone, before we send a text, before we go into the room, before we write a letter, whatever. We pause, we breathe, then we breathe some more. Then we remind ourselves, grief is not a problem to be fixed. Our job is not to show up and fix this person. We remind ourselves that our only job is to hold space and to bear witness. We are there to help them be witnessed, to carry the weight of their grief for a while, to maybe help them carry their person's memory forward if it's a death loss. So all of that happens before you even open your mouth. And then I love to say, which is how I, sort of sign off my podcast. I sign off my writings to people. I see you, I hear you, I'm holding you in my heart. So my often is that, right? I hate that this has happened to you. I think it's so meaningful to say, I might be getting ahead of myself, but I will get ahead of myself for a moment. Don't promise something you're not willing to do. So don't say I'm going to keep checking in if you're not. Don't say I'm going to come by if you're not, which we can get into some of the practical ways. But when we say, I hate that this happened to you. I'm sorry this happened to you. I'm holding you in my heart. Also, people love to talk. I'm going to say for the most part, because I can't speak for everybody, but the majority of grievers I've ever encountered want to talk about their person. They want you to say their name. They want to tell stories. They want to remember. And when so many grief supporters tell me, well, I didn't want to mention their name because I didn't want to make them feel sad. Buddy, they're already thinking about their person and they're already feeling sad. And when you don't say their name, when you don't share a favorite memory, when you don't ask them to share a favorite memory, what you're telling them is it's your job to carry their memory alone, right? And when we don't show up because we think we're going to say the wrong thing, what we're saying to the griever by not showing up is we're othering them. I don't understand you. I don't understand your pain. You're not welcome in the community of belonging anymore. You're distant. So stop focusing on what to say and start showing up with the energy of being an accompanying them. I'm there to hold the weight and to bear witness and to acknowledge. If you like if your friend likes a little judicious use of cussing, one of my most popular early empathy cards was, there's nothing I can say except this is fucking bullshit and it sucks so much. And I've definitely said that to more than a few friends when they've lost something, because that's the truth. It is effing bull and it does suck, right? So like, to say the truth of things, but then mostly shut up, listen. You might be listening for them to speak. You might be listening while they cry. You might even be listening while they just sit silently. All of those are helpful. Our job is to accompany the griever. Grief is so lonely. And to remember that when we show up one day, they might be sobbing. They might be saying things that scare you too, by the way. They might be saying things like, I don't know how I can live without my child or my person. That doesn't mean they're suicidal. That means they're literally trying to figure out, how do they live in a world without their person? And so instead of saying but or panicking, we first say, I can imagine. That makes a lot of sense to me. Our job is to accompany and affirm. That's pretty much it.
And the other thing that you said in your book, but I'm really cognizant of, because I used to do this and I don't do this anymore. It's not necessarily to somebody who lost a loved one, but when somebody's telling you a story that's really, I mean, just traumatic for them, they're going through trauma. Yeah. And then you say, oh my gosh, I know something like that happened to me. And I just know how you're feeling. Oh, Lisa, I used to do that years and years ago. And I have completely stopped that. Yeah. It takes away the
locus of control, the locus of focus. Yeah. And I want to name, because I've done it too. I mean, now in these years, I think I am much better at not doing that, but I certainly did it in those years before. And it usually comes from I don't want to, like, if you're listening, you're like, oh, dang, I've done that. Okay, well, you're not a bad person, but often it comes from a place of, I'm trying to relate to you, right?
Exactly.
But your job in that moment is not to relate. Your job in that moment is to allow that person to be the center of the attention, to have their story heard. When we do that, when we say, oh, it's just like my cousin, or it's just like I one time was at a dinner party or like double date, horrible thing with somebody. And somebody said, and I don't know, it came out that Eric died of a brain tumor. And he said, oh, that's just like my ex-wife. She had a brain tumor, but then they operated on it and she's okay. And I'm like, in what way is that just like, and in what way was that helpful, right? So we don't have to show them that we relate. We have to show them that we understand, that we acknowledge, even if we don't understand it from our lived experience. We hear them, we believe them, we see. We know what deep suffering is like. We might not know what their deep suffering is, but we've all experienced some hardship, so we can use that information, but we don't need to turn the gaze. That's what I call being a grief thief, which is a whole chapter in my book too, right? Is we sort of turn the locus of attention to us. Now, I want to say, for many people, being around grievers at some point who are way further down the road can be helpful. So not the first time you bump into the griever, or the second time, or maybe even the third, but maybe the fifth or the 10th. And again, always understand, what is your relationship with this person, right? If you're a casual bystander, you're not going to offer or say the same things as if you're the best friend. But you might say down the road, you know, Sandi, everybody's grief journey is unique. And I have learned some things over these last 14 years about what it's like to navigate the world as being a widow. And if you're ever curious about what I found helpful or not helpful, I'd be happy to share what I've learned. Okay, right? So that's how we can say, like, we can acknowledge there's some things I might relate to you, but I'm not in there shooting on you. I'm not in there telling you what to do. I'm not offering unsolicited advice, but I'm letting you know, one, people live. I've made it 14 years. But two, there are other people out there who might be able to offer some lived experience, practical advice. So that's how we offer it, but not in the first or second or maybe even third. that's not our job early on. Our job early on is to just come alongside. When I think of like Ram Dass, we're all just walking each other home. I mean, in a way, what we're doing in our grief support is we're really just walking alongside. We're helping them bear the weight of grief, right? We're making the unbearable more bearable with our showing up.
And I do want to also say grief comes in many different ways. And so it can be the loss of somebody. It could be the loss of a relationship, a divorce,
the loss of a dream.
Loss of it. Oh my gosh, of a dream, the loss of country, like you said. So I think these apply across the board.
Absolutely.
So it's not necessarily if somebody died.
In fact, I think a lot of us are showing up as grief supporters for not maybe naming it or knowing that, for all the people in our life who are experiencing anticipatory grief.
Yeah.
Maybe with the diagnosis, the terminal diagnosis of a loved one, or the people experiencing ambiguous grief with the dementia diagnosis or Alzheimer's diagnosis of a loved one. That person is in anticipatory grief and sometimes both an ambiguous grief because, again, there's this uncertainty and they're just not the person they were in the before. They're physically still here, but cognitively different, which actually is what I ended up experiencing that year before Eric died. Like his body was there, but he was not the person, but we didn't know why. But so that person's grieving. So when you're showing up for them, those same rules apply. If you've gone through something with dementia with your family member, that could help that person, but don't assume that they're ready to hear it. Mm-hmm. So you still show up and say, I hate that this is happening. I can imagine this is hard. Is there something you want to share with me about what it's like to live with this right now that you can't share with other people? I'm here to listen and not judge, right? Maybe the next time or the third time, because you once took care of a parent with Alzheimer's like this person is doing, you could say, I learned some things along the way. And if you ever want to hear what I learned, I'm happy to share. But yes, we're experiencing, grief is in our workplaces right now.
It's in our world right now.
Grief is in our world right now. But to your point is that these are skills that these are really just skills for relationships, to be honest. These are skills for life, but they are particularly important in our grief illiterate culture when we're showing up as the grief supporter, for sure. Right.
So perfect. Oh my gosh, Lisa, we're
at time, past time.
Well, no, I don't care but it just went by so fast. It went by so fast. But I have some questions that I ask every guest. Can I ask you those questions?
Love it.
Okay.
Yes.
So that first question that I ask is, what is your number one go-to strategy if you're in a moment of mental distress? What is something that you go to shift you?
Hand on my heart. Always hand on my heart. There's that physical touch, that gesture of care. And a breath, a slowed, usually a 3-6 breath. So breathing in for 3, breathing out for 6 for a time, and maybe swaying while I'm doing it too, because that's also regulating of your nervous system. So it's sort of cheating but I do it all at once. So it's hand over my heart. I'm swaying gently and I'm really slowing down and bringing intention to my breath, breathing in for 3, breathing out for 6. All of those things regulate our nervous system, help us arrive back in the present moment because our fear is teletransporting us to, a future imagined state. And that helps me arrive here so that then I can make a more grounded, informed decision about what's my next best step.
Oh, I really love that. I love putting the swaying in it. I do that, but I love putting the swaying.
I think just naming that is a core regulating thing. We did that in the womb as babies. That's how we felt, right? Our parents, if we were lucky to have nurturing parents, rocked us or swayed with us when we couldn't go to sleep. So hand over the heart, which is a gesture of care that you're not alone. It's that physical touch. The swaying is that regulating, and so is the breath.
That's beautiful. Really beautiful. What's one of the best pieces of advice you've received in life, personally or professionally?
Oh, that's a hard one because I've received a lot from a lot of people. But what's on top of mind today, I think I have to give a shout out to my mom and AFGO. Yeah. I think that sort of principle of looking at these valleys that we go through, at the tumult that we go through at some point, and sort of naming to ourselves, this is another fucking growth opportunity, has been pretty much a game changer.
Yeah, I'm giving a shout out to your mom too on that one.
Yeah.
What does a successful life look like to you and feel like to you?
A successful life looks and feels like love is at the center of my being. And I don't mean romantic love. I mean, love is how I see the world, feel the world, kind of my morning mantra. And that I'm present more often than not. That's what a successful life feels like to me. I mean, really present in the moment, which is hard in our culture, especially in these times. It's hard for somebody like me who's survived multiple traumas to be present. So a successful life is being present more often than not with a sense of love radiating. Yeah.
That's beautiful. I actually feel that in this podcast because I'm very, very present.
Yeah.
And I listen to every word, and I do a mantra to set the love intention around it. It's very important. Okay, last one. Complete this sentence. In the past I was, and now I am.
Ooh, these are good. In the past, I was self-critical, and now I'm self-compassionate.
Well, that just should be written on a t-shirt. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Embroider that one on a t-shirt. Lisa, this has been a joy and honor. Such a pleasure. Such a pleasure to talk to you. I just feel at one with you. I do want to say I have the hard copy of your book, and I listened to it on Audible. And for those people who want Lisa to be your best friend, listen to it on Audible, because she's like your coffee buddy. She's right there just with her arms around you. I just love that about your narration on that book. It's really beautiful.
Oh, thank you. I loved doing it. And I wrote it. I really wrote the book, which is why my book, I think, looks quite different than other, grief and loss support books, as if I was talking directly to my best friend about what I learned at grief. So when I got to narrate it, it was fun to realize that I really managed to put on the page how I would speak to somebody. So
you did it. You nailed it. And the cover's so pretty and so happy. And I think you did a great job. And at this point, I always say to my listeners, if you like the podcast, and I'll say this for Lisa's podcast as well, Grief is a Sneaky Bitch. If you take time to just write a review or give it 5 stars, it just helps so much. And I read everyone. Oh my gosh, my heart fills deeply when I read them. I can't, Lisa, really, it just.
Same.
And I know you do the same. So I'm saying this for both of us.
Yeah, thank you.
And so thank you, listeners, viewers. Oh my gosh, there's no way we could ever do this without you. It's such a community, isn't it?
It's just such a community. It's
amazing.
Like
we're all holding hands together. I get a little weepy about it. Anyway, where can people find you?
Yeah, well, you can find me lisakeefauver.com, which you can find all the things, although I'm always trying to update my website. My podcast, you can listen to it, Grief is a Sneaky Bitch. I just wrapped season 6 of the show, wherever you're listening to this or watching, at Lisa Keefauver MSW on YouTube. And if you love the idea of AFGO, if you want to feel like I'm writing directly to you, offering you some insights, etc., you can join my community on Substack, AFGO with Lisa Keefauver.
Wonderful. And also I put all of this goes into the show notes. So if people couldn't write all that down, it's all in the show notes. Lisa, you are just really shifting and reimagining grief for all of us. And I so appreciate it. And thank you for being on here. I send you so much love, so much love.
Sandi, thank you so much for this conversation. I felt such beautiful energy in the room coming from you. I'm so glad Eric got to join us in his own way. And I love being in these conversations. So I hope this won't be the last. Thank you so much for offering me this platform. I appreciate it.
Definitely. Sending lots of love to you.
Bye, everyone.